Page 7. All right, we're on to gravel management, and Graham Hansen is doing the honors on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't intending to bring Mr. Cloden for the paper on the basis that we've presented both the paper and updates on, I think, 3 occasions. I think our most recent one was the last ENS meeting. And the update at that point was that we were successfully heading through a negotiated position as opposed to heading to any formality or hearing requirements. So the final and primary issues have been dealt with, which was, say, largely minor wording or wordsmithing issues in both documents. An annual meeting requirement between Forest and Bird and Fish and Game in terms of just an annual opportunity to look at the work programs and certain issues relevant to some of the in-channel, in-river works related to bird nesting and bird roosting as an example, and an update of in fact it was more to do with plans around whitebait habitat work that we've done over the years in terms of protection mechanisms at the lower end of the river. So it was quite operational stuff that was either they were aware of and were wanting to see more detail in the paper or reinforce the work, probably good work that's been done in the past, and some minor wordsmithing. Both papers, just to reinforce the previous presentations, were endorsing or formalising past processes that have been in place with the organisation, both around gravel management and the recent versions of the Environmental Code of Practice. So while there were modifications to it, it was very much on the back of plans and processes that have been in place for a considerable number of years. So that said, I think that the documents are reasonably substantial. They haven't been provided in hard copy, and I thought beyond those that would have read them, the highlighted components are, as I say, minor wording changes, an additional meeting or an annual meeting requirement, and some additional plans. So happy to answer any questions, hopefully without the need for Mr. Cloden.
Are there any questions? Councillor Bailey.
Yeah, so Graham, just very brief, my understanding is then from that is that everyone's happy?
Yeah, effectively. Well, sorry, exactly that. Primarily, as in fact, paragraph 4 is the statement there that we received both positive and a constructive input, particularly from Doc and Fish and Game, and you know, the evidence of getting around the table and actually discussing what was largely misconceptions or misunderstandings proved the value of dealing with it face to face.
Cool, thank you.
So one of the reasons you're happy you're dealing with tamatea taiwhenua?
Always a pleasure to deal with tamatea. Two very learned gentlemen, though.
We seem to have exhausted the questions. Are there any comments?
I'm happy to move, Chair.
Councillor Hewitt moves the recommendation. Can I have a seconder? No seconders. Councillor Bailey? Okay. Either of you wish to speak to it?
Thanks, Gens. I know that this has been the subject of consultation, and it's a good place that we're heading to with what you're doing with the gravel management. I note under 5.5 that you were looking for potential construction of the Ruataniwha Dam to cease sediment in the Waipawa River. So obviously this was done at a point in time, but just to note that sediment is still an issue there as well.
Yes, and yeah, a challenging space for us, but building on the recent work we've got with still a level of interest in the southern region, our impacts to direct those to our most problematic areas is the solution in front of us at the moment.
Thank you.
Any other comment?
Yep, thank you, Chair. Just very briefly to say that I think this indicates the benefits of sitting down and talking with parties involved that have an interest in what's going on before we take drastic legal actions or anything else like that. I'd much appreciate the work that you put in for it, Graham. Thank you.
No other comments? I'll take the recommendation. All those in favour, say aye. Aye. Opposed? It's accepted. Public transport. Anne.
Mr Chair. Just presenting our regular public transport update, but also incorporating this time a decision on whether to increase or change fares in any way. I'll take the public transport update largely as read, just to highlight a couple of small things, is that we are seeing a very modest pattern of growth now after making the changes in the bus service in September 2016. Total mobility continues to increase, and I think given the rate at which our population is ageing with the influx of retirees and so on that we're seeing from other parts of the country, that's a trend that we're going to be faced with for some time. The fare review is required annually, and we last presented a fare review to the committee, or to the corporate and strategic, it was last year, and that resulted in actually some structural changes and a decrease to remove some inconsistencies between our express services and our other Napier Hastings services, which take the longer route. We didn't raise any fares in any way, so the net effect of that actually was, a win for the passengers. We're not suggesting that fares should be increased this time. We last had a general fare increase of 3.6% in September 2014, but our cost index, the rate at which we have to index our bus contracts, has risen only by 1.8% in that 3 years. So, and we are achieving a reasonably good fare recovery rate, so because of a number of other factors, including the cost of the contract. So for that reason, we're recommending no change for this year. I'll take any questions.
Are there questions? Councillor
Well,
Dick.
Mr Chairman, I'll just make a couple of comments. One is that we're about to, well, it doesn't really relate so much to transport, but we're about to commence the half-term review of the regional transport plan, and a foundation document for that is the government policy statement, which dictates the general direction that transport should go in. That hasn't arrived, and the presumption is, in fact it's not presumption, it's certainty, that it won't now arrive till after the election, because dependent on which government is elected, there could be different philosophies applied. The other point is that you may have noticed in the paper on, was it Saturday or today, that Go Bus drivers presented or are going to present a petition to Councillor Bailey requesting that they be paid the living wage. Now, it's a matter of if that comes here. Have you actually received it, Paul?
Yes.
You have. Where it should go to, and my view is it should go either to this committee or to corporate and strategic, because whilst the Transport Committee has an interest, it is not the employer of the contractor. The employer of the bus contractor is Hawke's Bay Regional Council. The association with the Transport Committee has to do with the fact that we have partners in the public transport enterprise, which are in particular the two TAs that provide the bus stop and other infrastructure, and of course the roads that things run on. So that's my suggestion as to where it should go.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Dick. I've taken that advice on board, and I'll be presenting drafting a paper to be presented to the Corporate and Strategic Committee next week.
That's fine. The other little comment that I'd make, and I don't wish to denigrate from the proposal because it has its intrinsic merit, but in the photo apparently there were only one of our Go Bus drivers who are engaged on the intercity service. The rest were, well, I don't know where they came from. So
Okay.
that's my comment.
I actually do have a question. How, the item 4 here, the patient travel, DHB patient travel,
Yes.
it says usage has increased over 100%. So what is the level of usage, more absolute terms?
Okay. It's around, from memory, around 1,000 passengers a month
Really?
that are taking that free trip. Yes.
And so DHB is, how does that work? How do they reimburse?
So they reimburse us a set fare for 2 zone if they're from Napier, or 1 zone if they're from Hastings.
So the person pays and gets somehow
No,
reimbursed?
the person presents their appointment card and the bus driver pushes a button which says DHB patient travel.
Cool.
Mm.
Okay. All right.
It must be a valid appointment card for that day of travel.
Mhm. Okay. Any other comments?
Yes,
Some-
a couple of, a month or so ago, I was asked to sign a petition for a daily service on rail from Waipak to Napier. Is that been received yet?
No, not by me.
Quite likely to go ahead?
Just a supplementary question, is that one of those jigger things, or?
I refused to sign it at the coffee shop and the lady wouldn't give me a coffee.
Right, just so, it sounds like we're ready to proceed with a motion from someone. Alan,
Happy to
Councillor Dick
second,
is-
happy to second, Chair.
Councillor Wilson is second, and everybody understands that we are agreeing in this to maintain bus levels at current levels, with a further review to be undertaken next year. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. None opposed? It's carried. All right, biodiversity. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Chair. Desiree Cull's going to come up and run through a presentation on what has been very substantive and quite exciting progress that the Implementation Planning Group has made in bringing the strategy to life. And unfortunately, we were hoping to have been joined today by Connie Norgate as chair of the Biodiversity Guardians, but Connie can't make it. But I guess suffice to say there's been significant and ongoing input and contribution to this from a wide range of the community and other agencies and our partners in this, and it's at a very pivotal and exciting stage. So Desiree's going to run you through the kind of mechanics of where to from the Implementation Planning Group.
Right, thanks Ian, and good morning councillors. So yeah, the intention was to have someone external present today, and that was really to reinforce that it is a community document rather than a council document. But sorry to say that in the absence of anyone else, I'm presenting today. So we have actually reached some sort of key moments in the action plan development. We had our last meeting of the Implementation Planning Group on the 3rd of August, so that group has been wound up. We have adopted the action plan as a group, and the main purpose of today is to seek your endorsement of that document, talk you through the transition to the Biodiversity Guardians and the foundation and where to from here. So you'll remember this has been in process, the action plan, since about June of last year, where we set up the multi-stakeholder implementation planning group. This is a photo of the group, or some of the group, and the history goes back further than that. It goes back to the genesis of the biodiversity strategy was way back in 2011. And the strategy itself was adopted in March last year. The implementation planning group was formed in June, and that's the formation of the group. We held a number of outreach workshops, one with tangata whenua, one with the conservation community, and one with statutory agencies, in which we used intervention logic to identify outcomes and activities The implementation planning group then synthesised and prioritised those to get the 6 priority activities which are in the action plan. We also have been working on a draft trust deed which is in the final stages of development. The IPG had its last meeting on the 3rd of August, adopted the action plan, appointed the guardians and the trustees, and we intend to officially launch those 3 things on the 13th of November. So it's a quick summary of the journey to the action plan. The action plan itself mirrors the New Zealand Biodiversity Action Plan. It's a 3-year document and it has 6 priority actions. Those being ecosystem prioritisation, a survey of taonga sites and species, developing a Hawke's Bay Biodiversity Foundation, the establishment of a best practice interagency group, holding a forum events, and the 6th action is around proactive approaches to private landowners. So the Biodiversity Guardians is the successor group to the implementation planning group. It's one of the 6 priority actions. The intention is for it to be an incorporated society with actually multiple sort of tiers, maybe not just 2, and that the idea being there that through its membership fees it will raise a small amount of money which will sort of wash its face, and also if it gets big it can also do some projects on the ground or provide that funding to the foundation to do projects on the ground. Its roles and responsibilities, which are set out in the action plan, are to sort of guard the vision of the strategy. That's for the Biodiversity Guardians. They will also provide technical advice to the foundation on projects and have a role in appointing some of the trustees, and they will be the sort of oversight and driver of the forum. So at the last meeting of the IPG, all the IPG members signed up to be guardians, and we also appointed the leadership team for the guardians. So that is Connie Norgate, self-nominated and was appointed the chair. We've got Mari Taylor and Dr. Amelia McQueen as the co-deputies, Kay Griffiths from the Conservation Company as the treasurer, and the idea would be for the project manager to be the secretary. I can take any questions along the way if you have any as well. Then the next sort of, so the foundation, the guardians and the foundation are really the infrastructure that we're putting in place to lead us to the life of the strategy, which is to 2050. And the foundation is the other big sort of leg of that, and that is to have a charitable trust, quite independent of council, that has a goal of developing long-term a $50 million plus endowment that will allow it to run annual, biannual funding application rounds to do projects and to partner with others. So it'll be quite separate to council or any other government body, so that it can access a wide range of funding from philanthropists, corporates, etc. And to get there, we've sort of mapped it out, and we think to get to a self-sustaining foundation, we really need about $3 million in the endowment, and then that would enable it to fund itself. And we think we can do that in 5 years, and aim to have 10 million in 10 years. So some of the critical success factors to make that happen, we think, are local government financial support in the early years. So some leadership from local government, regional council included, as well as the TAs, to kick it off really, and to sort of a snowball effect. And to get a little bit of funding, then it's easier to get more. We also think it's really important to initiate some projects almost immediately to get people excited about the foundation and see that their money is being spent on something meaningful straight away, and also distributed across the region. The appointment of well-connected and high-profile trustees we think is really important, and we think it needs a dedicated resource to do that fundraising, relationship building, etc.
A question there?
Yes.
in the paper on page 27, you indicate some of the people who are interim trustees. Is it assumed the HBRC nominee is the chief executive?
Yes, and it may not be the chief executive himself, but his nominee.
And some of these names I know. Who is Mike Halliday and David Allen?
So they are on the Guthrie Smith Trust.
Both of them.
Both of them, and those four were the key people who were involved in developing what the foundation would look like. So we've kind of rolled that over for interim trustees. They also, have experience with the trust.
So has this paper, sorry, Mr. Chair, been for the Regional Planning Committee?
No.
No. I don't want to criticise a name, but we have, we'll say 18.4. I'm just wondering, you've got the treaty groups that I think the concept's absolutely wonderful, and I would like to say, and Peter's going to choke in a minute, they need to be dipping into their own pockets, for this. This is such a good process. So it needs to become before the Regional Planning Committee, and there needs to be representatives from the actual treaty groups. You've got somebody there that's a really good person, a committee's person, but he doesn't have anything to do with the Tai Whenua, the four Tai Whenua, or the Regional Planning Committee. So I'm not saying don't have him, but somebody else. And as I say, the treaty groups need to say, well, we'll put a few bob into this. I know here Tōtaki Titi's got a lot of money.
Continue.
Just that I guess it hasn't been through the RPC to date because it's a non-statutory document, so it's not officially an RMA related document, but I take your point that there is a good source of income potentially there, and there's, it makes sense too.
And if you just go back to what I'm on the floor, the three, number 16, the four supposedly projects, Lake Whātuma, in terms of the Tai Whenua, we were very keen on that when it looked as if the Ruataniwha Dam project was going to go through there. That area that DOC used to administer has come back to He Tōtaki Tini. Now, there's probably less joy in doing anything on that. Rather, this is the Tai Whenua's point of view, that we think that we should actually be encouraging the tuki restoration projects rather than just a small one. And looking at the photo, I see John Sheen in there, and I'm wondering whether he's pushing his barrow. He's been to the Tai Whenua. We support him 100%, but where he's going to be involved in it is on a very small basis. So I just wonder whether it's actually, we should be having 16.2, it's Lake Whātuma, rather than the Tuki project or the Central Hawke's Bay project or something like that. It's just wider.
Yep, so those really are just examples of what we could do, but the principle there is that we want to do something in each district. And the idea there is that we are going to the TLAs asking for joint funding for the endowment. So we really want to be able to demonstrate that we're doing something in their patch almost straight away, that they are getting benefit from their funding of the endowment.
And I think the Tai Whenua tamatea need to be having a conversation with He Tōtaki Tini in regard to, are we going to be doing anything together? And we haven't had that conversation yet.
Councillor Hewitt.
Yeah, and I'm pleased Mike's led the charge on the Lake Whātuma question, because I was along the same vein. How have you come to put this here, and who are you discussing it with, and is it setting up a sense of false promise? Because when we did the 10% rate increase for the region, Central Hawke's Bay was told Lake Whātuma would be benefiting from that, and now they're not, and you're going back for another dip with the same issue. So it's you might be creating some expectations. That's a nice word. Thank you, Desiree. That I'm a little bit concerned about.
Yeah.
I want to see this done properly, not.
Yeah. You know, I take that on board. I think that is a bit of a legacy of the hotspots and trying to find synergies with other existing projects. So we will need to go back and the work that Keiko's doing now around ecosystem prioritisation will inform what projects we do. So we're going through quite a systematic process which uses a software system to will give us a list of the 30 most rare and threatened ecosystems across the region. So we will be able to see where we get our best bang for buck in each of the regions based on the systematic ranking that Keiko is doing with a wider group. So we will have good basis.
Councillor Graham.
I just have a comment, and I don't want to, it's along Mike's vein. You've got their appointment of well-connected, high-profile trustees. That's hugely important, and they've got to be high-profile, but they've also got to be committed to this cause, so that narrows them down. But I think, you know, and I've talked to James about this, I think it would be really useful if you, at a workshop, talk to your councillors who generally understand who is high profile and who is well connected in the community before you come out with a bunch of names, because we can help in that. That's all I'm saying.
So these really are just the interim ones till I think April next year. Just so all we're doing within the next 6 months is getting the deed locked down and getting a bank account, and then we will be looking for go through the proper process to appoint someone. So we will definitely be coming back and asking your advice on who they should be. Yeah, just till April next year, really just to kick it off. And they understand that too, that they're just there warming the seats, really.
I'm not well connected.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. And it's along this, my question I suppose is along this line of in the idea of Lake Whātuma being in this mix. And I'm just trying to differentiate between what the biodiversity strategy is trying to achieve versus what we are, say, for example, trying to achieve with our hotspots. And I was just, where are they? To my mind, they're slightly different things. But am I incorrect in that? Perhaps Ian or yourself may be able to help me in that. I mean, that's just an example. But I just didn't want us to be trying to achieve the same thing from different directions.
So it is a really good question, and you might recall in the discussion that I brought to you, might have been this committee last meeting, in the proposition of integrated catchments and starting to talk more about outcomes rather than outputs or processes. So biodiversity is a really good example where actually there are many, many outputs or activities across council that overall contribute to biodiversity outcomes across engineering, biosecurity, land management, science. They all contribute in some lesser or smaller ways to biodiversity outcomes. And what we're wanting to do, and it will be part of the long-term plan discussions that we'll be having with you, is ensure that we're bringing to you packages of work that overall contribute to outcomes. And if biodiversity is an outcome, then I would like to bring to you a view on how all of the various bits and activities we're doing contribute to that, so that we don't end up with, the biosecurity team focused in one area and riparian activity, which could be quite complementary in a completely different place, that there's a bit of discussion and dialogue going on, and the hotspot work happening here and some land management activities happening over here, that there's some alignment and synergy so that we end up with best value for money spent in these. Recognising, of course, though, that ultimately, if this, and we're very much hoping this foundation realises its goals and ends up with many, many millions of dollars in the bank to spend on biodiversity initiatives in the region, they will obviously be free to go and spend that how they want. One of the key things that we'll be doing and will have an influence in, and by being part of that, is to ensure that our activities and the activities of the Department of Conservation and Fish and Game and others align with the overall strategy objectives and the foundation spend. So we've got broad alignment, because bear in mind the strategy, its genesis, one of the very first things that was on the table was, why are we all kind of parallel playing in the sandpit? Why have we got all of these agencies off doing different things in different places and no broad alignment? So internally we can do better, and I think externally we can do better, and that's the overall sort of hope of the strategy process and the foundation and the guardians, etc., as we'll see more of that realised.
Thanks for that, Ian.
Mike?
Yeah, could you alert Connie also that Ngāwhenarahui would be very interested in the predator-free at Mahia? That's been our long-term goal, because we've got several blocks there, large blocks covenanted, and there's always seems to be blocks there by other farmers. But if indeed that's one of the long-term goals of this, if Connie could contact Ngāwhenarahui, and they'd be really keen on being involved in that.
Councillor Curtin?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Some of the prior discussions touched on the area I'm interested in particularly pursuing. Again, congratulations for the plan. It looks great. I'm just wanting to have some certainty around the issues Mr. Maxwell alluded to, and that is driving the strategies and approaches throughout our organisation. You talked about the connected up the dots, and I'm seeking some assurance that internally, even though this is not an internal organisation, those dots are connected internally. So my questions are around particularly the action plan on page 26 at the bottom, and the allocation of resources there. We put in 50,000 for biodiversity, didn't we? And you've spent that there on an appointment, and then an event. So I'm telling that up to 50. You're not with me? Page 26. That's of the paper. Not the attachment, the paper. Yeah. So that paragraph 13 there, I'm seeing establishing Hawke's Bay Biodiversity Gardens and Foundation, 47,000, and then I'm picking up the 3,000 further down the column, being our 50. Is that the
yes, that's right.
That's right there.
Yep.
And I'm assuming that most of the 47 will be the salary for, and that's for what, a 6-month appointment?
The idea there is, yeah, that's right, it is a fixed term contract to get us over this LTP period. The intention would be for that person, primarily their role would be to secure that funding through the TLAs and others, but there is an intention that they would apply to leverage that funding for more money to keep them going as well.
I hear what you're saying,
yeah.
But just for the practical purposes, because your commentary suggests this, is that you're looking for greater commitment over a longer period by this council to that sort of role. Would that be fair?
Yes, yeah, in the early years.
Okay, well, you need to be upfront, and my next question was actually in regard to the sponsorship from this council through it. I'm assuming the report lines are through Mr. Maxwell. Is that correct? Yes.
It's definitely one of the, through the LTP, we are putting a proposal forward to fund this and resource it.
So your heat needs to go on Mr. Maxwell to make this happen?
Yes.
And then my heat will come on to Mr. Maxwell?
Well, and ultimately, Councillor, it's you that approves the funding.
That's right. My next question then is really in line with already discussed. You've got activities of council, particularly the hotspots, plus other activities, and I'm surprised not to see coast to city here somewhere. is it possible to integrate the employee anticipated for this foundation with an employee of council to be working across all of those projects plus others, say 50-50 share between that role to make this a much more secure position? How does that sound to you, Mr. Maxwell?
Sorry, can you? I'm just trying to find where you're referring to.
Well, on that,
Councillor?
on that
Page 20, item 23.
section 13, page 26.
Oh, sorry.
You're looking at it. Yeah. Down the far right column is the expenditures anticipated. The council's 50,000 is included there, 47 plus 3.
Yeah.
Most of that is engaged with a person to do the job for the foundation.
Yes.
My question then is, in aid of focusing the effort both of the foundation and of the work of council, particularly in regard to the hotspots identified in paragraph 16. So there's activity there of council around those. Are you with me?
We would be a contributor in part to those activities, but not necessarily they're not necessarily our activities. The foundation's saying these are examples of projects that they may
have some sort of input or engagement on.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah,
so my question is it possible to look at the person that may be overviewing those activities from a council's perspective, and I'm sure there's a connectedness between them all, and plus others, and the role that's assumed in the foundation. So if, for example, you employed someone, 50% with foundation and 50% with regional council, we would achieve that goal. Is that something you'd consider?
Sorry. So the question is really, once the foundation's up and running and it's self-aware and it has its own staff, will we be engaging with them to ensure that our activities are aligned with theirs? Are we involved in working in the same areas that they may well be, and how do we collaborate and get best value for money? The answer is yes, we will be, absolutely.
It indicates here that this person will be effectively reporting to, I guess reporting to isn't quite the term, but to Campbell-Lecky.
That is a short-term proposition, though, and ultimately the foundation will employ their own
its own
person. Yeah.
Does that person have to be tangata whenua?
Do you want to proceed a bit with your...
I'll move.
Still got a query, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor?
And okay, some of this may have been answered, but I just want to have an understanding, like the contributions, the memberships and subscriptions in the first instance, are they intended to cover the governance and other costs of the board and miscellaneous establishment expenses?
Yes, that's exactly right. So it'll just sort of wash its face. It's enough to, it's primarily voluntary sort of involvement, like other incorporated societies, but it's just enough to run itself and perhaps contribute to the forum events.
When you say it's primarily voluntary, who will get paid and who won't?
The Biodiversity Strategy Project Manager would be the only paid employee at this stage.
Okay, at this stage. All right. And right, that position is funded from Regional Council. As this develops, is it going to be fully independent of the council, or integrated with the council, or part of the council? What is the relationship in terms of effectively getting things done?
So are you asking what would our relationship be with the foundation?
And vice versa.
And vice versa. Well, obviously the two separate legal entities,
Yes.
but with common, ultimately common objectives.
Yeah.
So the foundations, if you like, in summary mission in life is to achieve the biodiversity strategy, vision and outcomes. So that's their focus and that's their task. We obviously have a broader range of activities and tasks ahead of us, some of which intersect strongly with the biodiversity related outcomes, and therefore we would be working collaboratively, as in the answer to Councillor Curtin's question, on specific projects that relate to areas the Foundation may have an interest in. So if they're interested in an area that we are as well, or we're already in, we would collaborate, as well as that the strategy anticipated outcome that the various statutory agencies would be working together in a more coordinated and coherent way to achieve the strategy objectives. So it's about alignment and collaboration, and having a strong relationship, and not necessarily kind of a joined at the hip necessarily one. We are independent and we'll have independent things we have to do. And what we're saying is that we will try and work and we'll be focused on getting maximum value for the region's spend on things that might be biodiversity related.
Who's going to encourage the collaboration?
Well, I guess that ultimately comes down to people. It's about relationships.
Okay, and the critical success factor for this is building an endowment fund of $3 million or so?
Or more. 50 would be the...
Pardon?
50 is the ultimate plan.
Yeah, it's very ambitious.
Yep.
And, you know, I don't want to sound cynical, and I try not to be, but I have seen it before where you establish, if you like, standalone entities like this with the very best of intentions, but they end up doing nothing. So, pardon? So I just sincerely hope that doesn't happen and wish the venture the very best. But I think, you know, you've got to go into these things with eyes open and recognise that it's not going to be easy. It's certainly not going to be easy to raise that amount of money.
Can I just add that we think the timing is right now to do something like this, because there is a lot of other examples in the Taranaki. You had Jan Hania come and present, and the Next Foundation, and there are some there's big philanthropic money out there, so we're just trying to create a vehicle in which we can access that. And there sort of seems to be a shift in just general appreciation of biodiversity and its importance to everyone. So we are optimistic, and we are consciously thinking big. Yeah.
Well, good luck.
Where are you in your presentation?
So this is my last slide. Just next steps. Sorry, Rex. So Keiko is at the moment, that's why she couldn't be here today, she has the results of this ecosystem prioritisation that they're working through. She intends to bring that to this committee in the near future, if not in November, then early in the next year, and that will give you a list of ranked threatened and rare ecosystems, and the idea would be to work through that list and tick them off, so protect and maintain those important sites across the region. We also, key to the success, I think, of the action plan is this appointment of a dedicated project manager. So we're just in the process of developing a job description for that, and hope to have that out really soon. That person, I've signalled, would report to Campbell, dotted line to Campbell, would seek a lot of their advice and oversight from the Biodiversity Guardians. Long term, the intention is that person would be employed by the foundation and run the foundation. But just with them having no money at the moment, the idea is that we are filling that gap.
Do we not have $200,000 committed from an oil company?
Was it that much?
$50,000 a year for 4 years. And my understanding was it was coming into this entity.
So I think my understanding is that is to do works in Mahia for a project, so it's not going into the endowment.
Well, it's listed as one of the 4 projects there.
Yeah, it's an example of a project, but there is definitely opportunity to funnel that through the foundation, and that would kickstart the Yeah.
So it would go to the foundation. Campbell, I think, has made that pledge to us.
Okay, well, that would be amazing, yeah, if that happens. And then my last point is just the importance of the next 6 months in securing support via the LTPs for the endowment, the project manager, and the last point is to do with the ecosystem mapping and prioritisation. So that'll be coming to you through their long-term plan.
So Councillor Graham has moved the recommendation, and Councillor Bailey is second. Would you wish to comment?
Firstly, well, thanks for all the work you've done here. This is a really tremendous direction that the council's taking. It's exactly where we want to be, and I know Councillor Dick has some reservations, but I'll talk to that in a minute. But we're really privileged to have people like Charles Doherty here in our community and being prepared to give up his time and be part of something like this. But it does, and you know, he is the right high profile, not necessarily in our community yet, but certainly nationally, and has the right intellect and love of this kaupapa. So, you know, first of all, it's fantastic that we have people such as him putting his name forward, and the great work that you've doing. I would say I've been privileged to be part of this process. We've gone forward, and one of the things that as councillors we're all going to have to do is toughen up, because there's some tough decisions to be made around these issues, around cats and goats and what have you, pests that not all of us regard as pests. And we gave, at the committee, we gave Campbell a very, very positive steer that we wanted him to get on with these things and take the politics out of it. If it's a pest, and we need to talk about it like that, and we need to deal to it. So that was a steer that we gave them, and the rest of the councillors, I hope they support us on that. Given Councillor Dick's reservations, I'd just like to quote a small example that I'm personally involved in, and where you do have the right high-profile people, and I'm pretty sure he wouldn't mind me mentioning his name, Sir Graham Avery. I've been involved with him as he has done his, and the sports park in itself is a quango from the council, and I'm the chair of that, and we have been hugely successful as a one step, sort of a half a step removed from council, raising money and protecting community interests. But then you have a real dynamic person like Sir Graham come along, and I can tell you he has raised serious money beyond my wildest dreams or the capability. So the money's there in our region. You just have to have the right people to go out there and ask for it, and they will get it for a cause such as this.
Thank you, Chair. Just like to first of all thank very much the Implementation Planning Group for going through this process and presenting us with the way forward for the biodiversity strategy, for all the hard work that's been put in there. Really, really superb. I'm very much of the mind of Councillor Graham in that the target of a $50 million endowment fund, it's bold, it's ambitious, but given the way the world's going, the way the world's looking at these issues now, attitudes have changed. It's now the 21st century. It's what the people are after. It's what our children are after. It's what our grandchildren are after, because we're looking to the future in this respect. I totally get that by having the endowment fund, it takes a lot of politics out of this particular issue, which I think it needs to happen, because this is something that's an intergenerational issue, and it will continue for a long, long time after I'm not here.
Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, congratulations for the paper. I'm hoping to see in the next few months the energy going into socialising biodiversity throughout council activities and plans and programs, so it'll be good to see that. I note the current expenditure of $50,000. I think council needs to at least double that and make sure that at least for that period of time you've identified the start-up of the foundation needs that level of support. or at least needs to have security of the person doing it, and also integrating across some programs. So I think looking forward to some movement in that regard, but also seeing where the biodiversity strategy is an integral part of all of the plans, and that's transparent and deliberately reported as such. Commenting on the notion of external funding and the limitations thereof, Councillor Dick cautiously cautions that, and quite rightly so. However, we are in a situation where funds could be available from central government. We've got a bid for 2050, the predator-free scenario, and there are a whole raft of different new approaches coming from central government where opportunity abounds in my mind. So we need to be in a position to capture those. Plus we've got, happily, with the advent of Kevin Atkinson to the Power Trust, you'll be able to go to the Power Trust and get all the money you like from there. So, Mr Chair, finally I'd just like to comment that we will be expecting a 6% return on the funds advanced to the Foundation, because that's our new benchmark for all sorts of investments across the board. Thank you.
Are there other comments? I also would want to just congratulate the group. This has been quite a long process, and this is a robust plan that you've put before us. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes forward in the long-term planning process as a concrete ask. And I would also, the other comment, I do think there is private money and government money outside the region for this, but echoing what Councillor Graham has said, if you want a step change in the level of resource put into this area, there will probably also need to be a step change in the leadership required to do that. Not to denigrate all the work that has gone in, but there's been a very grassroots, bottom-up generated process, which gives it a hell of a lot of credibility and legitimacy in my mind. But it needs to be overlaid with money-raising capacity, given that that's ultimately what the future requires for this thing. And so I think there also needs to be a process of maybe some collaborating amongst some of us as to who and where that might actually come from over the next few months. So, I'll put the recommendations. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you. So we are going to go to Ahuriri.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So look, I'd just like to welcome three teams to the room who are going to run through a bit of a collaborative presentation. So if you want to just come up the front and join us, folks. Barry Wilson, Mana Ahuriri Trust, Richard and his team from Napier City Council, and Anna Madaris-Smith, who's presented to you before on the estuary. It's a bit of a tag team, so Anna's going to lead you through a presentation that pulls together the a reminder of the work that we're doing in our hotspot activities in the catchment or in the estuary, and you'll also hear a little bit more about that from Jolene later this afternoon with an update. And then the Napier City Council are going to lead into a presentation of their master plan that they've developed. And I would also just like to really stress that this, both our hotspot work and the Regional Council bid in partnership with Mana Ahuriri for the Freshwater Improvement Fund does reflect exactly that, a partnership, and that we've been working very, very closely with Mana Ahuriri in this. And so hopefully you'll see that reflected in the presentations that are going to come to you now. So I will, now that Anna is ready, I think, hand over to her, and she'll start the discussions.
Thank you very much for hearing me out again. You want mine? Normally, I've spoken to you a few times about Te Whanganui o Aratu, or the Ahuriri Estuary, And we do have some progression on this. The committee had asked for us, with the hotspot funding allocated, to come back to you and with regard to the report that we produced last year as to how we were going to actually action some of those recommendations of the report. And the hotspot funding has been integral to us being able to deliver some of those to you. So just a little bit of a quick recap. I have presented this to you before, but the most significant wetland along the entire length of the east coast between East Cape and Wellington, and that is from a Doc Ramsar publication in 1992. So again, Ahuriri Estuary, Jewel of Napier, very, very important to in a national scale. But at the moment we do have a few issues with the estuary. We have too many sediments going into it, too many nutrients. All of Napier City Council's, or Napier City's, stormwater runs through it, 70%. It used to be 95 until the cross-county waterway was put through, which goes out now at Marine Parade. And we've had a massive expansion in the invasive tube worm, the Phycopomatus enigmaticus, which has prompted all this to go into a fairly declined state, particularly at the top end of the estuary. What are the problems? We have stormwater inputs. That's a picture of this invasive worm, the Phycopomatus. It's causing weirs across the estuary, which stops that water flow backwards and forwards. It's causing anoxic sediments coming through, no oxygen in the sediments, which means the things that normally would live in there, that feed the birds, that feed the fish, aren't able to thrive. And too many nutrients contribute to the algal blooms that we're starting to see there. That causes much lower dissolved oxygen, and again, everything requires oxygen to survive. Now, one of the issues we have, or one of the opportunities, is it's a very complex catchment to work in. There are a number of initiatives going on, both externally and internally. And this is just a quick diagram that Ms. Douglas put up for us. What that means in practice, we've got the rural landscapes privately owned. We've got forestry occurring in the upper catchment. We've got wildlife refuges gazetted in the 1956 Wildlife Act. We've got industrial areas adjacent to the estuary. We've got the airport company operating. We've got the Landcorp farming system operating. We've got Napier City Council owned land adjacent to the estuary. More complicated, half of the estuary bed is in Napier City Council ownership. The other half is in DOC ownership. Then we've got the Hawke's Bay Regional Council functions, the local authority functions, the Department of Conservation functions, and over all of this we've got Te Komiti Murawai o Te Whanga. And I'm assuming you're all aware of Te Komiti, but maybe Barry would like to speak to that.
Kia ora tata, Barry Wilson, Mana Ahuriri Trust. The Committee o Te Murawai o Te Whanga is a committee which was set up on the basis of bringing all the parties together in regards to the estuary, and that was also a statutory statutory area where we negotiated with our settlement so that we could all come together in one point to actually work and address the issue, the estuary. So that's what it's for, and it's made up of 2 district councils, Hastings and Napier, DOC, and Hawke's Bay Regional Council, and then of course Mana Ahuriri Trust, which is part of that statutory position. So that's what the committee's for. It has its own terms of reference and all those, which we will start to work through, and a committee has been formed to start working on that, but today we're about the presentation.
Thank you. So the hotspot funding that we've been allocated for this financial year, there are a few actions that we're able to get in on the ground. The tank plan change is one of those things that are overarching some of this as well. This is our long-term plan. How do we take the current state and values held for the estuary and how do we make them work long-term? But there are some areas of the estuary that need attention now, and this is what the hotspot funding is hoping to achieve. One of the key things, given the diagram I just presented, is looking at integrated catchment management. Basically, I liken this to soccer people on a field, rugby players on a field. You want to make sure that even though they're all individuals, you're all operating towards the same goal. And that's all an integrated catchment management plan will do. It will provide the framework for setting an objective and making sure that irrespective of your jurisdiction, your mandate or your agency, you're all heading in the same direction. Of course, there will be areas that you disagree on. That's fine. Pop them to the side. There's many, many areas that we all agree on, so let's focus on those and move forward. We've got a common goal, all working towards it in our respective agencies. So how does the ICMP fit into the framework? So as you can see, we've got the Hawke's Bay Regional Council with its regional council functions, Napier City Council by my colleagues here with their infrastructure, asset management and local functions, Hastings District Council. There are other interested, Department of Conservation obviously, other interested parties such as Hohepa, Hawke's Bay, Ahuriri Protection Society and the airport as well, and overarching Te Komiti Morawai o Te Whanga. So the Integrated Catchment Management Plan comes in somewhere like here. It says, right, okay, what are the goals that everybody is trying to achieve for the estuary? What are currently people doing in that space? What needs to be done in that space? And then that can feed up to Te Komiti, which helps to deliver that long term. The other aspects that we have of the hotspot funding is this Whakaparamatis removal. Now, I've mentioned before that in a different meeting that we can't just get in. Sure. Previous slide? Or previous slide?
So the committee is the statutory committee is the statutory authority that we are all going to be part of. That's right, isn't it? Yes. Yeah, that's it. And it will be led by Mana Ahuriri. They'll take the chair, they have the chair. So that is the overarching authority in the estuary, because we're all there at the table. So it is sort of, I hate to say this, but it's kind of like TANK, but it's more permanent version of the local people will decide. Is that
well, I think it's more like the co-governance framework in which we've all got our piece of but being led by.
But it's driven by mana whenua
yes.
of that hapu.
Yes.
So it is. They are the drivers,
yes.
and we are there to assist in that process. So that is it, and we're all clear on that.
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay. Chair, could I just perhaps clarify that it is similar to TANK in respect of the Te Komiti will make recommendations through to the various statutory authorities there, but each of those institutions, whether it be the City or District Council, Department of Conservation or the Regional Council, still needs to give effect to those recommendations through its own statutory processes, such as the Regional Planning Committee, through to the Council and through our instruments such as the Regional Resource Management Plan and the Regional Coastal Environment Plan. The work of Te Komiti and its recommendations don't prevent or in any way preclude councillors and all of those institutions fulfilling their statutory responsibilities. So while recommendations will come through, and certainly it's everybody's intent to give effect to those, it doesn't mean that there's still not work to do in giving effect to that by the council's own committees.
Ahuriri understands that and agree with that, what James just said?
I think that we need to talk about it.
Okay.
Definitely.
So in terms of that framework though, and in terms of the integrated catchment management, it isn't it's about getting our house in order and identifying what we're currently doing, what we need to be doing, and so that we've all got a clear picture on what's going on at the moment, so that when the committee comes together, they know what we're about, they know what we're doing. Like we're on the ground, we're doing pest control here, we're doing pest control here, we've got too much sediment in the estuary, it's coming from these sites. Does that make sense? So the other aspects of the hotspot funding that we're talking about, and as I mentioned, the Whakaparamatis, we can't go in there and take it all out to improve the water flow because it is doing a job in terms of filtering through the number of nutrients that are in the waterways. So what we are looking to do, preferably before spring, so that we can get it, we're in spring, preferably before summer, so that when it does get to really, really warm weather and low flows, that we do get some water flow. It's just break up these weirs that are being created. And we'll just, as I mentioned before, we need to use a mechanical digger to do that, just to go and take some of that biomass out. Another part of the hotspot funding is a land action plan development. So that is looking at what can we do on the ground, in probably the majority of them in private ownership, private land, to actually help reduce the amount of sediment and nutrients going into the estuary. What I mean by that is being able to go onto a farm, have a chat to the farmer, look around and say, okay, right, well, if you put some trees in there, it'd stop the erosion coming off that site. If you did some riparian planting there, and the catchment works coming up next is about helping that actually be achieved on the ground. The last thing we have to do is really have a good look at the catchment hydrology of the Ahuriri. It is not intuitive. It's a very, very managed system in terms of the water and in terms of its history. And so understanding the water balance, what water's coming into the system, what water's going out of the system, where is the water being transported to and from, in order to understand what Te Whanga actually needs in order to function as a system. So in that respect, we're understanding a bit more about, if we do start to do things like stormwater treatment wetlands, what that actually means for the estuary as a whole.
The land action plan development, is that similar to farm and environmental management plans in the catchment, or is that a slightly different take on that?
It could ultimately result in farm plans. Obviously, there's no policy requiring them, but that doesn't prevent us getting in there. It's effectively, if you like, critical source areas. So where is the sediment coming from? So we're going to use SedNet to figure out those areas where it's a problem, and then go in and undertake some physical action on ground to prevent it, mitigate it. So we've actually engaged just recently another land management advisor who will be working pretty heavily in this area with a real focus on it to, like I say, get ahead of the policy. We don't necessarily need to wait for that. We know where the issues are. We'll get in and start trying to address them.
Okay, so in follow up to that, so at the moment it's the landowners are doing this voluntarily rather than because they have to by being forced to by policy.
Yes, there's no rules requiring this stuff, but again, does it prevent us going in and bringing solutions and tools and hopefully funding opportunities and leverage opportunities to get some action on the ground to deal with the issues as we find them.
Have you started that process yet? Have you spoken to anyone about that?
No, so literally the person who we're bringing on board, we've literally worked through the contracting process this week. So
okay, I'd be interested at some stage to know how that's going.
Sure.
And as part of the communications strategy that goes along with the hotspot funding, we are trying to kickstart public meetings with landowners sort of ASAP, in order so that when this person does arrive at their door, they're not going, what do you mean, what problem? We have started those conversations. We do take every opportunity to go out and present to people about what the issues are, but we need to get into the catchment a bit better. Of the landowners that I've spoken to and the farmers that I have spoken to, they're all very keen. They just need guidance and how to do it and what is their best bang for buck. And a lot of the lifestyle owners, they're unfamiliar with the, many of them won't have lived on a lifestyle block before. They're unfamiliar with water rushes past them, okay, but where does it go? So they're used to having that all taken up by infrastructure.
So in terms of water quality targets, work plans, outcomes, what's the division of labor ultimately between Tank, the A of which is Ahuriri, and this exercise?
Yep, and that's a very good point, because we've got to remember that the A in Tank is Ahuriri, and it's there's been a lot of focus on the Ngāraoro Karamu and Tutaikuri. So we are starting to draw up nutrient advice around nutrient limits in the estuarine areas. That's at our next meeting, I think, on the 10th. We have also just at Tank. We have also just got the source modelled loads to the estuary. That doesn't include Ahuriri. Ahuriri was not part of that source modelling. The key thing, I think, is that we've got some critical issues. This funding has been pulled in order to address those critical issues while Tank goes on in the process to stop it getting bad again, and to put those limits on long term. Once we get a plan change like Tank, the actual on the ground changes will take some time, and then the environmental benefits will take further time. So this is about kick-starting that process.
So is the assumption therefore that any rules, so to speak, will be set as part of the Tank plan change?
Yes.
And then this group would implement those?
Yes, so absolutely. This isn't derogating from the Tank policy process, so we absolutely anticipate new limits for the estuary and other parts of the Tank area out of that. I guess what we know is intuitively we know where the issues are, and you'll recall Anna presented a fairly bleak picture of the estuary in an SOE report 18 months ago, I think. So we know intuitively where the issues lie, and we don't actually have to wait for the policy outcomes to tell us that. We can get on and start to get ahead of the curve and get some of the solutions in train, recognising that these are things that will take many, many years to successfully implement. So we want to get on and start doing those things now, and that all of these things we would see will ultimately have us moving towards the final policy settings and limits, but we're just not waiting for them. We're starting them now.
Just to follow up on that, so this is happening in parallel with Tank, not necessarily bound to it, whereas I'd assumed that Tank was the font of all knowledge and it all emanated from there. So things can happen in parallel.
Contribute.
Is that the correct spelling for phycomatosis?
Phycopomatus? Absolutely. Phycopomatus enigmaticus rolls off the tongue. That is the end of my presentation. At that point, I'd like to invite our colleagues from over at Napier City Council to add their part to the whole Ahuriri catchment story.
So, yeah, welcome Richard and the team. Richard, if you could perhaps just introduce your team to the council, and just a reminder, please, if you can, possibly use the microphone, because this is webcast, and the public can't hear the webcast if you're not in close contact with the microphone.
Okay. Kia ora, councillors. I'm Richard Miniker, the Director of City Strategy from over the road. Claire Lincoln works with me, and in the back row, Wayne Jack, of course, you know, and Paulina Wilhelm, City Development Manager, and Jason Strong, Environmental Solutions. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about the Ahuriri estuary. We had a good conversation the other day with Councillor Curtin about what we're doing, and we're delighted really to be able to share what we're up to with you all, because I think we're at a sort of sublime moment where we can pull a whole lot of things together, in part because of the Te Morawai work that's going to come, and that we've started, well, that Mana Ahuriri has started to initiate now, and I think just as a good collaborative environment working, and has been working for some time.
Do you want to control the keyboard?
Oh, you can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Am I in the way? Do you want it to get out of the way? Okay, so we, why a master plan? In terms of the city, district planning is normally where you do your work in terms of your rules. You've got your regional plans, we have our district plan, but it's sometimes not the best place to articulate strategy and really focus on, I think, aspirational ideas with the community, and around particular things around land use and resources and those sorts of things. So it's hard to do that via straight into your district plan, and you need other tools, other strategies like master planning to really be able to explore land use issues and those sorts of things in a long-term view. So that's our major reason for embarking on a master plan process. And behind it is is some work that we did for the whole city in terms of the city vision, and we kicked this off a couple of years ago with the idea of, again, trying to work out, well, where does the city want to go? What does it see itself as? What's important? What does Napier want to do in the next while? And we realised that we have some really important parts of our city that we need to focus on. The city centre, Ahuriri, and in particular, and because that is our gateway to the world, and you know we have the port there, the airport, and that's where things happen, and we've got some real jewels in there. And as part of that city vision focus as well, we wanted to understand what makes us special, and we came up with some core principles, and one of them is in there, as you'll see, is the ecological excellence. And from that, we started to have a look in more detail about Ahuriri Estuary. And it's a beautiful place, as you know. It's lovely, and it's a real jewel for us, and it was recognised as that in terms of the city vision in that regard. So it's really important to us. But it's got some serious problems, and going a bit ahead of me.
Sorry.
I'm getting lost now.
Okay.
Yeah. So just what we recognised, I guess, was that we have got some serious issues with the estuary, and that while it looks nice, it's got some real fundamental, as you guys know, issues with metals and other nutrients in the estuary that we needed to really expose somehow, because you can't, unless you're a bit honest about what's going on there, you can never move on to the next stage of doing something about it. So one of our first conversations was really Jason in particular talking to our council about the state of the estuary with the help of Anna. There she is, yeah. And just sort of to uncover actually what's going on there and what state it's all in, because it's not all peaches and cream, as we know. So that led us to thinking, okay, well, if that's the case and we do have all these aspirations for it, we need to move on to having a much more focused look at it, and this is where the master plan really got its genesis. So in terms of that, yeah.
Hastings District Council as a partner stakeholder?
It's I guess for us, there's probably somebody that we would be consulting with, but because we're talking about the estuary within our jurisdiction, the regional council is the kind of umbrella that would incorporate the upper reaches and those sorts of things in terms of Hastings area. So it's more, that one's more a consulting thing, because we can only influence really what's within our part of the estuary.
But
just plans for Albert.
Can I continue my question? Doesn't the Hastings district control part of the estuary, whereas they swoop around Napier?
Yeah, but we don't have any influence that from in terms of our process.
The second part of my question, aren't they a stakeholder in the new statutory authority?
Yeah, yes. They are, but I'm talking, I guess, about the master plan and the statutory authority, and this is why we've got a bit of a complex web, but that is the overlying body, of which is really. Barry, do you want to come in here and explain a little bit how that works?
Come to your question, is that while there are plans being presented in various shapes and forms, the reality is that'll be one plan. I mean, that's what it is. And there are components within certain areas whereby they're discharged, but that's the idea of the whole committee, is to be more collaborative in terms of putting the whole plan together. So one plan, not two plans, not 3-day plans, one.
Well, that is exactly
there are
my
components
point.
at the top end of the estuary, which the regional council have a lot of information and knowledge on, and particularly about the sediment issues, as there is at the bottom end. But no point in doing the bottom end if the sediment and everything is affecting the top from coming down from the top end. So we've got to get it all right, not part of it right.
Barry, thanks for endorsing my concerns, because that is exactly my point. At the beginning, you should get all the stakeholders involved, so they're not sort of shocked like we are with Matariki. You know, that's what happened there. So if you get everyone at the beginning and you're talking right from the very beginning, it's more easy to get to when you get everyone in the same room. They should be number 5. I can't see any reason why they're not.
Wayne, you want to say something?
Yeah, so what we're basically trying to say with this is a particular plan for the Pandora and the Ahuriri area that we have direct control over. We absolutely recognise that there is a plan that will sit across the top, which will have all the stakeholders involved, particularly, as you pointed out, Rick's, Hastings. But this is a plan which we're saying that we have a direct influence over, and we're wanting to do some work now to then guide some environmental enhancements through that area, but also because we link through to Pandora through to Harding Road as well. So this is a master plan for this area, but it will sit underneath the Ahuriri Estuary Management Plan, and that's where you bring in all the other stakeholders.
And if I can just add to that, so that in terms of the concept, we wanted to not come to the table, I guess, when the Te Morawai was happening, without any understanding of what we thought. So we needed to somehow have an idea of, well, how does Napier City Council view the estuary, and what does it want to do, and where does it want to go, and where does the community want to go, and then those things can be, some of those things can be picked up through the Te Morawai plan, or changed, or added to, or what have you. But if we come there with no thoughts, that's not a good place to be. So we thought that this process was a way of actually starting to articulate the vision from the Napier City Council's point of view, not from everybody else's point of view, about that area, and I guess and also being able to say, well, this is what we would like to start doing in that space.
Just for the record, I don't accept the excuses or whatever they are. I think the lessons we have learnt is get everyone involved early, and I agree, because they are going to be at the table with Mana Ahuriri.
Yeah, and I'm sure that they will have their ideas about their parts as well. So
no, but it'd be good if they embraced yours ideas in the beginning. Oh, I'm speaking to a deaf wall, but
yeah,
I'm quite used to that.
So do they pump their toxins in as well as you, Jaggers?
Hastings? Yeah. I'm not familiar with what happens with the Hastings district.
As far as Mana Ahuriri is concerned, Hastings City Council is part of it, simple as that. And there are other areas which are related to it, not just the estuary, particularly the Lancourt Farm and other areas as well. So it's not just that, they are part of it. And how we start to put the mix together and how everybody puts into it. Today, as I said, is a presentation for one component of it, but it is not the main component. There are a lot more to add to this.
That's right, and it's not statutory process. It's a process we've embarked on because we wanted to start that going, and we've involved as the direct stakeholders that we thought were required in that process, rightly or wrongly. One of the key drivers is a very similar one that's dear to your heart, and dear to Mana Ahuriri, dear to everybody's heart, and that's the water quality issues. That's where we wanted to start with, but obviously we're a district council, a city council, so our built form is important to us as well. But a key focus was to try and put that lens on the water quality issues of what is acknowledged, I think, by everybody as a real jewel for Napier and beyond. So our scope in terms of this master plan, and it might help answer your issue, is that we wanted to incorporate some of the land and the the estuary, but that's it's a really reasonably fuzzy line about sort of the connectivity of issues that we're affecting, I guess where we've got some influence on. And we know that there's upper reaches and various other things as well, but this is to focus on that part. Right, there.
Should over there? Okay. So with all master plans, there's always my preference too. Sure. So with all master plans, there's a vision and there's a set of principles that come from that. And our master plan vision is a thriving, healthy and resilient Ahuriri estuary and coastal edge. And I think the thing that's important here is, yes, a large part of this master plan scope is the Ahuriri estuary and its edge, but we're also extending through to the inner harbour and the coastal edge along Harding Road and Perfume Point or Te Karaka. So from this vision, there's a number of principles. You can see them up there on the screen. The first is connectivity, and this is around promoting connectivity between people and place. And that's both in the sense of physical connections, but also a sense of belonging or a sense of place. I suppose that connection that you have in your heart to a place as well is just as important. Quality. Now, quality is something that we try to strive, and it's something that's really important in the city vision, and that's around delivering quality social, cultural, environmental and economic outcomes. So always focusing on what we can, the best that we can do. And the third is authenticity. So this place is, it's kind of gritty in its realness. You know, we want to make sure that whatever we do there isn't just prettied up for the sake of it. It's we're using what is authentic in that place and bringing out those characteristics. Okay. And then from that comes the master plan objectives, and I won't go through all of these, but you can see them up on the screen there. Pretty standard approach. We've divided the environment up: water, land, built, etc. Very brief statements. Okay, so we've divided we've divided this master plan scope area into 3 areas. The first being the upper estuary and former lagoon area, the second being the lower estuary and Pandora, and the third being the inner harbour and Ahuriri. And there's, I think, 33, 34 initiatives within each of these. Now, we're not going to, simply there's not enough time to go through each of them, but we will be having the website with all the information in a complete PDF, as well as an interactive, what's called a storyboard. You can go and zoom into an area, click on an initiative, and it comes up with more information. So that will be available as of tomorrow, and you can head onto our website, #TalkEstuary, and have a look for yourself. I also have printed versions of the master plan should you wish to have a copy of that as well. So I'll hand over to Richard. There's a couple of initiatives in the upper estuary area that we'd like to really focus on.
Before you hand over, I'll just clarify, and following on from Councillor Graham's line of questioning before, from what those last couple of slides have just told me, is that this master plan is more involved with essentially what's potentially going into the estuary rather than the actual water quality in the estuary itself, because that's an issue that's the overarching plan. Would that be so? Just
well,
a
the two
difference
affect
between
each other, I guess.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
but it's trying to, I guess, in a sense, focus on some of the stormwater, for example.
Yeah.
Industrial and also the industrial impact into the stormwater. Those sorts of things are things of focus in this in this part of the plan, not
Yeah.
necessarily upper catchment, riparian
Yeah.
management and things like that.
If
Yeah.
I may
I was just trying to get it, yeah.
add something, it's about that goal and all using our individual initiatives and mandates to achieve that goal. So
Yeah.
we can have a goal, regional council set a goal within the estuarine water of having, very healthy estuarine water. If they're not on the same goal and 70% of their city's stormwater goes into it, we're going to struggle to achieve our goal.
Okay, you know, I can work. I've followed my head now where you come from. I think. And that,
Yeah.
Like I say, this is about managing what's going into the estuary, and then what's actually the estuary itself is another is the master plan type thing.
The point is, we're concerned about discharge.
Yeah.
And what's being discharged.
Yeah, absolutely.
And let's get to the point. And a lot of that is what we call paru, which is dirty. And so we want to get that cleaned up so that our kids and everybody else's kids it used to be our food chain. We can't eat it now. And so we want to be able to get back to where it was before, and then our kids are safe in there swimming and providing that at the same time. So the discharge is one of the big issues, apart from the sediments, so they both go together in the end of the day. And so we have to address both. Our preference is no discharge.
Yeah,
And so we've got to work towards that.
Okay, so speaking of that, 70% of Napier stormwater goes into the estuary, and that's just the historical way that the city has developed. They chose not to put it into the sea, and the estuary was the place it has come to. So that's a difficult thing to retrofit and change, to go the other way. But that's not to say necessarily that there's not things that we can't do as a consequence. And so we were trying to, I think, think about that what is the best thing to do, as well as maybe provide some opportunities landscape-wise as well. So not just the water quality, but what can you layer over the top? And one of the ways that we were thinking of, and has been come through this plan, is to sort of start doing some polishing of that stormwater before it enters the estuary via some wetlands. And so the bit in the circle there is that's Prebinson Road, and what we're thinking of is to create some artificial wetlands in that area to start treating the stormwater and slowing it down before it enters the estuary. And that way, I mean, it starts, because if we wait, for example, for the tank process to set the limits, and then we think about, well, what are we going to do afterwards? And this way, hopefully, is working already in the right direction, and should it's that kind of trying to align things at this front end and front-footed a little bit. So yeah, that's one of the key initiatives, to have a look at that area and start developing that and talk to our community about that. And the other one, which is sort of adding to the recreation as well as ecology and habitats, is the idea of softening that edge of the estuary and creating what I call an archipelago of islands through there, softening that edge and using again the softer treatment for stormwater to enter the estuary, but also changing that into a very much an environmental mecca, I guess, and enhancing that part of it and giving back to that bit of the estuary. So that's probably one of the major initiatives that's been floated at the moment. It's just an idea. It's got to land, and the community's got to have a look at it. It's hopefully something that will or it has so far, with the councillors across the road, resonated quite well. But there's a lot of work to be done here into the future. But the concept is as I've discussed. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, could just have an orientation there. That roundabout, is that the one by Mitre 10? Where the hell are we?
Yeah. The Mitre 10's over here.
Oh yeah, okay.
The expressway. So this is the expressway
Okay.
coming along here.
Where's the port wetland?
Port.
The port wetland.
Oh,
That
the
means
new
water.
one that they
Yeah.
put in, that is just over here. So this is the Onikawa industrial area.
Right.
Pandora Pond is through
Right.
here.
Right.
Mitre 10, the roundabout for Mitre 10 is probably about there. You go head along and hit the expressway.
So that the area in the circle is basically presently undeveloped land.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a farm. Yeah.
Pardon?
It's a farm. Yeah.
Well, part of Lagoon Farm, is it?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the problem with landscape architects' drawings. It's hard to quite reference what you're going on, but the concept is basically to soften that, this whole edge here from the razor sharp thing that it is now, and create a recreation, but also habitat and those sorts of things, and then have the artificial wetlands and the stormwater, instead of going straight through the ditches into the estuary, start taking them through polishing wetlands, and have an infrastructural element that is also a recreational element. So that's the idea, is to have a bit of icing on the cake, if you like, for something it's a very difficult issue to resolve, because so much of the city is geared into the estuary at current. It's very hard to turn that around and put that somewhere else.
Okay, so in the Upper Estuary and former lagoon, the initiatives that are put forward for that area are predominantly related to environmental restoration, the management of our stormwater, cleaning that up, and environmental education. I won't go through all of those, but you'll see them in the master plan itself. Okay, so the second area is the lower estuary in Pandora. There are 11 opportunities within this space, and this area is predominantly focused on stormwater management again. We've got the Thames Tyne, which is obviously quite a big one, and we're working in partnership with the Regional Council on that already. And Jason Strong is here today if you have any specific questions relating to that Thames Tyne work that we're doing with the Regional Council as well. Also, this area focuses on a lot of recreational opportunities. It's a massive area for everybody enjoying that space, and there's quite a lot of pressure on that space actually from a recreational point of view. There's a lot of initiatives relating to transportation linkages, making better use of the north-facing high amenity spaces that border onto the estuary, and also the future of the Pandora industrial area. So this is one of those kind of hairy, scary things that we're going to have to tackle at some point. But is it an appropriate use? To border onto the estuary? It's something that we're going to need to consider at some point.
Can we just go back to that one for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Just wanted to float the thing. One of the ideas is that this area here is a sort of north-facing, overlooking a magnificent wetland system, and we've got industrial fences, and it's really a huge lost opportunity. So one of the ideas is to turn the attention back the other way, and maybe allow some mixed use in there. You know how what's happened to Ahuriri and the mixed use, and all of a sudden that is the place to be, even though there's silos and stuff like that, but it's seen as very valuable. And perhaps this can happen here, and if you get that kind of land use change and that value in there, then people start looking after that edge so much better, and you almost get you know, a free kind of momentum for improvement, because who wants to kind of throw rubbish in their own backyard kind of thing. So one of the ideas is, you know, to use that kind of the market, I guess, to help us improve what is currently quite difficult for us in terms of the sort of land use that's in there, which doesn't need to be in there necessarily, and doesn't really value what that can be.
I take it that, which is really, I totally get and enjoy what you're saying there, but I take it that thinking has incorporated the anticipated sea level rise that we've been talking about with the Coastal Heads Committee?
Yes. Yeah. So that's what I was going to say. Oh, I forgot to mention that. So that, you know, the island idea, again, that's a way of you can sort of cut and fill to help with that issue. Yeah, but definitely, yeah, that's an important issue.
And that's also one of the initiatives up there as well, is around dealing with the coastal inundation threat. Oh, sorry. Yes. It's pretty scary when you look at the inundation maps. You think, oh, that's quite a big area. Okay. Let's flick through these. Right. Okay, and the third area is the Inner Harbour and Ahuriri, and this area is, as you can imagine, it's quite a built form area. There's a lot of it's not so much about the natural environment anymore, although you do have the coast and the Inner Harbour, which is very important. But there's a lot of built there's commercial and all facing onto that, onto the water and the edge there. So the area is primarily focused around, for the initiatives, is around amenity, recreation and circulation improvements, and a better coordinated development of the Ahuriri Business Park area as well. So that's developing at full steam, and there's a lot of scope still for that to develop, so we need to make sure that that we're ahead of the game and that we're providing the necessary infrastructure for that to take place.
Can I just raise a point in relation to that, this area, and it's been raised at the Regional Transport Committee and with the port, and that is that there are real concerns in terms of the Hyderabad Road, rail and road connection to the port and the Ahuriri bypass, that dual area where you've developed this mixed use, and there is starting to become a potentially conflict between that and the quite vast increases in traffic moving to and from the port, which is getting to the point where congestion could become gridlock. So I think you've got to be careful to watch that. There has been a series of meetings with the port set up, and Napier City Council hasn't participated to date, but I believe it should.
Just in reference to that, there was the study done for the port access study, and we're concerned about that as well. Not so much the gridlock, but some of the safety issues of kids and various other people running across Bridge Street. And it's we've been trying to get some, I guess, focus on the potential for disaster to happen for people trying to cross that space. It's very hard without a death to get some focus on that, and that's been our major stumbling block, is how you leverage that focus into actually getting money spent on those kind of pedestrian improvements and things like that across the road. And my understanding from the port access study itself, though, is that in terms of congestion, the volumes, the road is more than capable of taking the traffic, but it doesn't seem to want to cater for pedestrians.
The port access study is out of date already.
Just on the Councillor Nick, is that one of the issues, of course, is that right outside what we all know as the old Rothmans building is the away bridge. And I mean, that's causing a lot of congestion and issues, and it's dangerous. I mean, trucks just pull out. I mean, they can't see sometimes.
No, it's a number of issues. There's the, what do you call it, that Figure of 8 roundabout. That's a problem.
So just to let you know, we've actually been working on that, and we've been working with the council on that in terms of rectifying that. And we have a slight improvements in the drive, which we can shift it out of that area.
Presenters, we have about 15 minutes. We need to talk to proceed here.
Cool. And I'll just hand over to Richard now. Sorry, Richard.
Okay. So we're coming to the end of it. So as Fleur said, we didn't want to bombard you with, I don't know how many. There's a lot of initiatives in there, and we're trying to highlight, I guess, the main ones that we think are of interest to you, I guess. But really interested in your feedback about that, and I'm hopeful that the Te Morawai process will pick up some of those initiatives and along with the ones from the tank and various others and into that integrated catchment idea and push those along. Yeah, and I hope that the Te Morawai process, I guess, will help us prioritise what's important to advance and what is not in that plan that we should be looking at as well. As part of that too, we have the compliance with the regional plan change of that tank will inevitably pursue, and we're already, in terms of that of some of the consents, working hopefully in the right direction, particularly around the Thames Tyne consent. There's been some good progress on that, I think, and we hope to use our city vision principles too, particularly around that ecological excellence, to keep reminding ourselves of how important it is to keep that focus for the city, to make sure that that the jewel does remain a jewel, and that we do keep, not pretending that it's fantastic when it's not. So hopefully, and I think I get the feeling that we're in a really good space at the moment, given what's about to, the Te Morawai process is about to kick off, isn't it, Barry? And I think the stars, to me, it feels like they're aligning in terms of getting some, really strong collaboration between the agencies to achieve some results. We are in a consultation phase at the moment. This is why we're coming to you, as well as, and I think that's going to also prioritise what we're doing. It'll be very interesting to see how the community views this. As I say, to date, the indications are that it's pretty favourable, and we have to then match that with funding and those sorts of things. We've started some work on that, and it's good to be, we can join existing projects to some of these initiatives, and that's what we're trying to do, looking through our long-term plan, but also identify where we just have to go and maybe front up and create some new money. And we're still learning, I guess, about what some of the low-hanging fruit and what the councillor priorities are. So in terms of implementation, we're in the consultation phase 2, and we need to kind of get that feedback back and process that. But also, we're looking forward to putting the draft plan, I guess, on the table of the Te Morawai process, so it can feed into that. And continuing the partnerships with you and the department and Hohepa and Friends of the Estuary, etc., because I think the collaborative model is the best way to not only just do things, but to access funding and various other things as well. We will use our own capital works program and long-term plan, of course, as well. So that's us.
Thank you, Chair. I notice we have a report later on our agenda about the Thames and Tyne Street stormwater discharge that it's non-compliant because we haven't completed there's a plan that was supposed to come, education program and catchment management plan that's supposed to come back to council. From what my memory serves me correctly, was due June this year.
No, September, I think.
September.
Yeah.
So that's obviously overdue, but I assume that's all back on track again because I was involved with that process and it seemed to stall for quite some time.
Yeah, would you like to speak, Nathan?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's cool. The other question is I noticed in all your action points, and I assume that's in the long-term plan, is the issue we had this winter of the sewage discharge into the estuary and what's required to fix that from a council's infrastructure point of view. I assume that's all going to be, we're going to see that come through in the long-term plan for funding to do something about that.
Yeah, I think, and to be fair, I think that's a very complex issue. It's not, with infiltration and those sorts of things, it's a difficult issue to just say, well, we're going to fix it. And we're no different from a lot of other cities in that issue. And I think it would be good at some stage to be able to come back to the table and explain what is our understanding of that. And what the way forward is. I wonder, Jason, have you got any thoughts on that?
Currently, we're working with the local planners, putting together an application for consent to deal with that simple discharge, just in the interim until we can figure out exactly what can and can't be done in this space. And we're looking at there's a lot of councils spend a lot of money organising and carrying out a whole lot of modelling. A lot of modelling needs to be done first to figure out what changes can be made to the whole system to prevent that happening again.
Yeah, can you, it's frustrating in the sense that you're talking about it being difficult and, there's lots of problems and all that sort of stuff. It's quite frustrating because we're dealing with a hang of a lot of landowners, farmers out in the rural community who continually reminding us that we seem to be letting the urban areas get away with things, and this is hugely embarrassing for me to be sitting here as a representative of the Napier community to see that sort of thing happening. So it would be nice to see some action being taken.
Well, as I say, I think it is a complex issue whether we like it or not, and we would welcome the invitation to come and explain how that, or what the difficulties are, or that situation with a bit more depth, because it's not an easy fix.
Yeah, I don't doubt that for a second. I don't doubt that it's a difficult issue. I don't doubt any of that. But at some stage, it's going to have to stop happening. So, however that happens, I don't. That at the end of the day, that's Napier City Council's responsibility, but we are responsible for maintaining and enhancing the estuary.
Councillor.
Well, I'm happy to move recommendations, Mr. Chair.
Wish to speak, George?
I do wish to speak, Mr. Chair, and make a few comments. Firstly, by way of acknowledgement and congratulations to Napier City, and the production of this plan is, in my view, an extraordinary effort. And what I'd like to say, Mr. Chair, is that a few days makes a tremendous difference. Having come along and seen this plan, and you've heard a few comments from councillors coming this morning. We are on a journey. We're just starting out, and there is currently a bit of a deficit from this organisation in terms of our knowledge, understanding and appreciation of the respective organisation's perspective. And it is the alignment of stars. We've got Barry here from Mana Ahuriri, and what we've got is convergence, and a very happy convergence of the positions that have been around us for a long time but have not converged. I go back to a 1989 plan loftily produced and presented, but nothing has happened ever since. What I'm sensing, though, is a sea change, a watershed moment, if I can use those terms, in terms of progressing this issue. And when I've looked at the plan itself, it really sets out an extraordinary vision, but it goes much further than that. There are 36 or something opportunities, as they're termed, and if you read those in detail, I have been studying this at 3 in the morning, so what a life I lead. But what I see in it is extraordinary vision and thinking, but matched with a desire to drive this right through the whole processes of our sister organisation across the way in terms of their responsibilities, their jurisdiction. So congratulations to Napier City for that. And I would make this comment, because Wayne is here, this wouldn't have happened without Wayne. This needed and achieved a change in leadership that understood the issues, and that was the momentous thing that's happened from their organisation to bring this about, followed up, I would say, by the contributions of staff who also get it, who get this picture and are able to articulate and drive it. So that, to me, augurs very well for a much more productive future than we've had in recent times. I'll go back to it, and essentially what the plan has done is turned myself from an arch critic into an arch advocate for the Napier City's direction of travel, and that's what we all need in this time of criticism of our local authorities, is this, if you like, lack of connection between what we do and what the public are feeling at the same time. I feel as though both our organisations are catching up. I go finally, Mr Chair, to the issue which has vexed our respective relationships over a long period of time, probably 3 decades now, and that is the issue of consenting. Consenting arrangements are extraordinarily limited, and the reality is that they fail. We have got evidence of the failure of our consenting RMA processes, and later in today we've got a program which identifies the failed consenting arrangements between agencies. The reality is it gets down to the people. If the people are getting it right, consentings pale into insignificance. We've got the classic example of the Havelock North water situation. If the people had got it right, we wouldn't have had that crisis. I feel with this plan and a collaboration between agencies, we will get it right. And that, to me, is the important bit. We can let those consent issues pale into insignificance, be in background only. If we're collaborating on the big picture, we're able to talk about consents, and they've already been mentioned by Councillor Bailey. We can progress those in a productive fashion without antipathy and without the conflict that has characterised those in the past. So congratulations to Wayne. He deserves the commendation because he's driven the vision, and congratulations to the team at Napier City for producing such a in-depth, comprehensive document. Well done.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you. I'm not sure how I follow all that, except to say that I agree with a good hunk of what Councillor Curtin said. I really appreciated you two coming up and presenting your plan. I appreciate the huge effort you've put into it and the huge intellect, and I can see that you're passionate about the estuary, and that's probably the first thing and the most important thing. So I really appreciated that. However, I want to deal with another thing, and that is this. We have a habit in Hawke's Bay at the moment of delegating to our communities, and I've always been a very strong believer that our communities need to make the decision, and perhaps we need to ratify it, but that I'm not too strong on central control, and that's why I'm a strong supporter of the statutory board that is going to be led by Mana Ahuriri. Te Komiti, have I got that right? Bloody Mohi standing correcting my and and I've always been, when it was first raised, I always thought this was a great idea, that we're going to have a community-driven initiative which is going to be led by mana whenua of that hapu, led by them, controlled by them. They control the chair, but each one of our councils has a person on that board, and we're all going about a governance person. We're all going about that, dutifully appointing people to that board. And I'm expecting that to be a dynamic group and a dynamic authority. It's not in statute yet. And I'm expecting all the stakeholders who will all have an idea, and you are the most important stakeholder outside them, outside the mana whenua, because this estuary is your jewel right on your doorstep. So you're definitely high up the rankings. But when I look at it and I hear what our chief executive says, so we've got this group and we're saying get on with it and tell us what you want for this estuary, and then it has to come back to, first of all, the regional planning committee. They have to give it a tick, and you know, they have to give it an 80% tick, so they might not. And then it has to go to the council and they have to give it a 50-50 tick. And I just think we're getting things back to front, that we're either going to delegate to these community groups such as Tank, and I share Councillor Balford's frustration that around this table that a lot of people don't understand the huge effort that's gone into that, and the huge effort that's going to go into this estuary planning from you right now, the work that you have done and the work that's going to be subsequently done. And it's quite difficult for us to wrap our heads around all these things. And the point is coming where we're going to have to trust our communities and trust the people that are involved that they're getting it right. And I don't think, with all due respects to everyone else, that we have, all the other groups that we've put together, that we have got that right. So I just want to make that point, that my personal position is strongly behind this new statutory board, which is led by the mana whenua of that land.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I may not have had the conversion on the road to Damascus that Councillor Curtin has had, but certainly the times that I've spoken to the staff and the Chief Executive and the Mayor of Napier City Council around the estuary, I can see there's that fire in their eyes about wanting to get things done and restoring the health of the estuary. So I think this is a big part of achieving that, and just like to thank you for all the work that you put into it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you've done well to get Councillor Curtin as an advocate. But I still have some concerns about what the mana whenua have in terms of the 75% of the discharge is going in there, and especially long term. Napier's probably going to get one day as big as Waipukurau. So your population is going to go up. One would think that the wastewater is going to go up too, and so is this going to work?
Well, is that a question? Yeah.
No.
No?
No. Any other comments? I would just comment that I think it's a very impressive plan, but to me the test of it is what you keep calling the difficult issues, not the several dozen opportunities that in some respects, and I don't mean to demean them, but reflect more eye candy than actually gripping the issues by the horns that are the difficult ones. And those are the ones that I'm looking at, and I hope Councillor Curtin is right, that there is a change of attitude about some of these issues at our fellow council. Thank you. I'll call a question. All those in favor of accepting? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, was that the 2 o'clock Napier City Council session? Pardon? Hastings. Oh my God.
Got a few links for you if you want. So we've got these.
Just those out?
Yeah.
Just chuck them
We'll just leave them here. Yeah.
Hey, if you've got problems with, traffic issues down there,
Yeah.
if you just talk to the